Scientist who discovered GMOs cause tumors in rats wins landmark defamation lawsuit in Paris, November 30th, 2015. Was French professor Gilles-Éric Seralini correct when he discovered that scientific feeding experiments past 90 days with GMO foods in rats can cause serious health problems, including tumors? The answer to that question has been debated ever since the initial publication of his study, culminating in a republication of the study in another peer-reviewed journal that wasn't nearly as well covered as the initial retraction was by the mainstream media. Now, Professor Seralini is in the news again, this time for winning a major court victory in a libel trial that represents the second court victory for Seralini and his team in less than a month. Alright, what on earth is this all about? For those who are joining this story in medias res, this is Professor Gilles-Éric Seralini, who published a landmark feeding study regarding GMO corn and Roundup Ready herbicide in 2012 in an article in the Journal of Food and Chemical Toxicology. Now, the details of that retracted are in this video, this eye-opener report that I did in December of 2013 called Genetic Fallacy: How Monsanto Silences Scientific Dissent. Of course, this is going to be linked up in the show notes. Please go and watch this video if you don't know about this trial. Or about this study, and then its subsequent retraction, and why that retraction is, well, was bogus. This is a very important report, and I'm not just blowing my own horn here. This is a report that actually won a Project Censored Award last year. I never really mentioned that, so you might not know it, but yes, this is, I think, one of my most important reports on this subject, so I hope you will go and take a look. Of course, the transcript of this is also up on my website under Genetic Fallacy. So let's just read a little bit about this study, Long-Term Toxicity of a Roundup Herbicide and a Roundup-Tolerant Genetically Modified Maize. The researchers followed 200 rats over 2 years, divided into 10 groups each of 10 males and 10 females. 3 of the groups were fed Monsanto's patented NK603 GMO corn treated with Roundup herbicide, 3 groups were fed Roundup-treated water but no GMO corn, and a control group was fed neither GMO corn nor Roundup herbicide. The team's results indicated that the rats fed the Roundup or the GMO corn, separately or combined, were more likely to experience a range of ill health effects than the non-GMO control group. Tellingly, the adverse health effects did not start to appear until the 4th month of the study, while a previous industry-sponsored feeding trial on the same corn variety only lasted 3 months. That study did find signs of toxicity as well, but these results were dismissed as not biologically meaningful. Alright, I'll let you continue reading about how ultimately this study came under immediate fire from the usual suspects in the industry-funded lobby groups, and ultimately the Journal of Food and Chemical Toxicology retracted the study, but not retracted it based on its own published guidelines for its principles for retraction, i.e. clear evidence that the findings are unreliable due to misconduct or error, plagiarism or redundant publication, or unethical research. No, none of those. They came up with a new criteria. Mainly, they found that no evidence of fraud or intentional. The results presented were correct, or not incorrect, but were inconclusive. So, on the basis of inconclusiveness, they retracted that study, which again is a double standard, as I go on to note, that is only applicable apparently to critics of the GMO industry in general and Monsanto products in particular. And there's a specific part of that accusation in regards to this. Again, in that video, Genetic Fallacy, I play a clip of Dr. E. Ann Clark talking about how the journal in question that retracted this study happened to appoint a Monsanto a lobbyist on their board during the time of the retraction. So, again, so much to this, but ultimately this goes back to the question of whether or not the science itself was acceptable. And basically, critics of the study argue, well, those rats are prone to those types of tumors, so they're not good for this type of study, and blah, blah, blah. But this still represents fundamentally a double standard used in evaluating GMO safety studies. And the pro-GMO industry can get away with inconclusive studies as long as they are on the GMO industry side. But as soon as an independent scientist tries to do the exact same type of study, the exact same have results that are the same as the GMO funded studies, they get retracted, like Seralini. So this story comes from InScienceCensorship.org, which says, an example of an inconclusive study that has not been retracted from FCT, the Food and Chemical Toxicology Journal, is the Monsanto study on the same GM maize variety that Seralini tested. This study used the same strain of rat and analyzed blood and urine samples from the same number of animals as Seralini used in total. Crucially, however, the Monsanto study was only 90 days in duration. Thus, it was terminated a month before the more obvious pathologies began to appear in the Seralini study. Nevertheless, the data in the Monsanto study show statistically significant differences in multiple organ functions between the GM and non-GM feeding groups, which the Monsanto authors dismissed as not biologically meaningful without proper scientific justification. As a result, and of great importance from a public health perspective, this GM maize was passed by regulators as safe to consume on a lifelong basis, despite the fact that the Monsanto study was only 90 days in duration and contained scientifically questionable claims of statistically significant findings being termed as not biologically meaningful. In fact, the Monsanto data as presented are inconclusive. Applying the same criteria to the Monsanto study as were used to evaluate and retract the Seralini study, the Monsanto paper should also be retracted, as it was too inconclusive, in its findings. Blatant double standards going on, and I'll let you read through all of that. But the point of all of this is that although the Food and Chemical Toxicology Journal did retract the study, it was republished in another peer-reviewed journal, this time the Environmental Sciences Europe journal. So, again, this was republished with an addendum of comments regarding the criticisms of the first study. So that is there. It's an open access journal, so you can access this freely and read through it yourself. And I suggest you do so. But as this article pointed out, somehow, for some reason, the republication of this study in the peer-reviewed literature did not seem to get any traction in the mainstream media, although the initial retraction of this study got a lot of attention in the MSM. Oh, look, this crazy anti-GMO scientist with his vendetta against GMOs, his study has been retracted for bad science. Well, of course, again, when you look into it, it's a ridiculous claim, and then it was republished anyway, but you never heard about that. Well, now he has won a couple of court cases on this. The first one that they note here in this article, on November 25th, the High Court in Paris indicted Marc Fallus, the former chairman of France's Biomolecular Energy Commission, for forgery and use of forgery. And according to Seralini, this relates to the signature of a scientist whose name was used without his agreement to argue that Seralini and his coworkers were wrong in GM corn. So basically, this Biomolecular Engineering Commission chair for France slandered Seralini using a forged name of a scientist. He is expected to be sentenced for that crime in June of 2016. And this is the second court case that Seralini has won in the last month. The other one, you can find details here. Seralini's team wins defamation and forgery court cases on GMO and pesticide research. It notes that in September 2012, an article written by Jean-Claude Jaillet in Marianne magazine said that researchers around the world had voiced harsh words about the research of Seralini and his team on the toxic effects of a GMO and Roundup over a long-term period, research that was supported by the independent organization CREGEN. The journalist wrote of a scientific fraud in which the methodology served to reinforce predetermined results. But Seralini and his team and CREGEN challenged this allegation in a defamation lawsuit. They were assisted by notaries, blah, blah, blah. On 6th of November 2015, after a criminal investigation lasting 3 years, the 17th Criminal Chamber of the High Court of Paris passed sentence. Marianne magazine and its journalist were fined for public defamation of a public official and public defamation of the researchers and of CREGEN. So, some court successes going on here, defending Seralini and his name and reputation, but perhaps who heard anything at all about this study, they probably only heard that it was retracted and thus not really that important. Well, that is a lie. It is being shown and demonstrated to be a lie, but not in the MSM, that of course is not going to publish things that are in opposition to their cushy advertising dollars from their Monsanto clients. No, it's up to us to continue to get the word out about this. So there's lots of information here that, again, I'll put in the show notes. Please do start with this genetic fallacy video and work your way out from there. And if you know about all this information, excellent. But as always, I guarantee you there are people in your life who do not. And if you bring up something like this feeding study showing these tumors in these rats, you're probably going to be confronted with people saying, oh, that study was retracted. Well, you can use this information to show those naysayers in your life why they are wrong. And hopefully we can continue to learn our way forward in all of this. Again, this is an exceptionally important story, and it goes to the heart of the types of scientific frauds that are perpetrated with the aid of various organizations that don't want the truth coming out. We are here to help that truth get out, so you are a part of that fight. Please help spread this information. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.